In his State of the Union address, President Bush declared the United States was taking on the challenges of global hunger, poverty, and disease, and urged support for debt relief, which he called the best hope for eliminating poverty.
I ask that you fund the Millennium Challenge account so that American aid reaches the people who need it in nations where democracy is on the rise and corruption is in retreat. And let us continue to support the expanded trade and debt relief that are the best hope for lifting lives and eliminating poverty.
But what exactly are wealthy nations doing to reduce the debt of impoverished nations? Today we take a close look at companies known as Vulture funds. Vulture funds buy up the debt of poor countries at cheap prices, then demand payments much higher than the original amount of the debt, often taking poor countries to court when they cannot afford to repay. For an in-depth look at this issue, we turn to BBC Newsnight documentary reporter Greg Palast.
What's horrendous is the kind of con that's going on. You have a president of the United States standing up in front of Congress saying, give us money, give us billions to write off. In the State of the Union, he puts it in the budget without anyone saying that, in fact, it's not getting to Africa, it's going to his biggest donors.
Start with the Vulture Fund, for people who are not familiar with this term.
Yeah, Vulture Fund is a term that's used for bond speculators who take the bonds, the cheap debt of the third world that may sell 10 cents on the dollar because no one expects to ever collect on these debts. They buy up the debts really cheap, and then they use political muscle, bribery, or lawsuits to try to squeeze, not only get back the money that they put down, in the case of Zambia, $3 million by Mr. Goldfinger, or they'll try to get $40 million. In the case of the #1 vulture here in New York City, Paul Singer, he's paid about $10 million and expects to collect $400 million from the Congo.
And tell us who these people are.
Who they are. In the case, for example, Paul Singer is the #1 donor to George Bush at the moment. It's given over $1.5 million in the last campaign. He's Rudy Giuliani's chief fundraiser, raising $15 million now for his presidential campaign. He's a billionaire. He controls a $7 billion fund, and he's obviously very close with the Bush administration, which is crucial, absolutely crucial, to his making these profits.
Why?
Under U.S. law, the President of the United States has the absolute power to stop any vulture fund from collecting money from a poor nation. Under the U.S. Constitution, it's called the power of comity. The African nations are pleading with George Bush to stop his big donors from collecting. Now, what's happening is that in the State of the Union, George Bush said we have to give debt relief to the poorest nations. The U.S. taxpayers are putting up more than $1 billion to write off the debts of the African nations. But what Bush isn't saying is that he is then allowing that money to be captured by his biggest donors, like Paul Singer, so that the money for debt relief is not going to the African nations where they're desperately in need for, funding for medicine for AIDS, for education, which is what it's earmarked for. These guys are actually going into U.S. courts and saying, give us the money. Now, George Bush, again, has the absolute power, and the judges are waiting for him to write a note. They're saying, George Bush can ask us to dismiss this case in 1 minute, but we need something in writing from the White House.
When America serves others in this way, we show the strength and generosity of our country. These deeds reflect the character of our people. The greatest strength we have is the heroic kindness and courage and self-sacrifice of the American people.
I mean, you have to understand, like the guy that uses the Goldfinger moniker, he hired Jack Abramoff's firm for influence. These guys are rewriting the laws, for example, of New York, to make it easier for them, through their lobbyists, to make it easier for them to seize Africa's money. A tremendous political clout. You're talking, like I say, the #1 donor for Bush, the #1 donor for Giuliani. They've hired the big heavyweight lobbyists like Abramoff's firm, and then they're even, in one case, we know they're making payments that are seriously questionable right now to corrupt the governments of Africa. Bush can put a stop to it tomorrow morning. The problem is that he's not been responding. I know that the president of Congo came to visit the White House, And the Vulture, Paul Singer, his operation ran a whole smear campaign